Good afternoon or good evening, wherever you are. A warm welcome to K Brothers and our virtual tasting of two vintages. We are streaming this event live from our beautiful old cask room built in 1901 by Herbert and Frederick Kay. Behind us, you can see a barrel that's filled with beautiful old fortified wines. So as soon as you step into this room, you've got this beautiful smell of muscat and tawny, and yeah, it definitely reminds you are at the winery, not just seeing the barrel. My name is Michael WEHRS, and I'm heading up sales and marketing for K Brothers since 2011. And before I head into introducing the panel, I thought I'll just take the opportunity to talk a little bit about what we've done at our outdoor area. We have had a bit of time It's the one-stop shop, and in terms of food, it's not a restaurant. It's basically a place where we offer beautiful regional cheeses. We've got cured meats, we've got condiments, just to make you feel comfortable, relaxed, and really enjoy the day. Obviously, we would encourage you to visit us on your next trip to McLaren Vale, and I hope you have the opportunity to travel to McLaren Vale. If you're South Australian, of course, it's a bloody easy ride, just about 35-40 minutes on the expressway, and you're here. Our panel for the day has changed a little bit.
Quite obviously.
Due to reasons of the health crisis. Katie Spain is in isolation, so that threw a little bit of spanner in the works. However, our good friend Nick Ryan, wine journalist and presenter of hundreds of good food and wine shows in educational classes all over the country, has made the journey from Clare Valley to step in the role. He wanted to taste some good ones for a change.
Don't say that, Michael. I won't be able to go back if I actually agree with you, but maybe I do.
And then on the other side, we've got, of course, the creator, Duncan Kennedy, winemaker, viticulturist since 2015. He will tell us, of course, a fair few stories about the vintage, about the making, and interesting insight into the wines. So, Nick, I'll hand over to you, and you all can listen to a real Aussie.
Thank you, Michael. It is interesting that you did mention that the barrels behind us are full of fortified wine. That is at this moment in time, but give us an hour and we'll put a hole in those, as well as the glasses we've got in front of us today. And it is quite amazing, and welcome to all of you out there, wherever you may be across the country, that as we sit in this 121-year-old cask room in this beautiful place, and for those of you, most of you I'm sure have been here, those of you that haven't, it is well worth the trip. And to think that here we are talking to a bunch of K Brothers fans and wine lovers completely all around the country, connected the way they are, would blow the minds of the hard-working men that would have built this building back in the day. So probably, I know we're going to kick off and we're going to look at the 2021 vintage and the 19, but I think it's probably important, and everyone at this time of year, when you're working through wine regions and you're running into winemakers who all look a bit haggard, their hair's a bit messy, they've started growing whiskers in strange places, and that's just the women. You sort of need to ask, how is this vintage looking? And you can usually tell, but when you see them to begin with, if they're not having a good vintage, the signs are there on the face. When I saw Duncan about half an hour ago when he came in, he looked weary, but he looked happy. So Duncan, tell us a little bit about vintage 2022 before we dive into these others.
Sure, thanks, Nick. Well, 2022, we're sort of a bit over halfway through. I think we've broken the back of it now. And because it's been a La Nina summer, it's been very cool. And in McLaren Vale, it's been quite dry. So unlike the poor people in the East Coast who are getting hammered and flooded, we've actually had a fairly dry summer and perfect ripening conditions. So yeah, the quality looks amazing.
Shout out to anyone that may be up in that part of the world as well, because we are thinking of you. So yeah, there are early feeling that the 2022 vintage is going to be a really good one. Mm-hmm. I know that you are a particular fan of the 2021 vintage. Mm-hmm. Yeah. You loved what 21 gave you. Some of those wines that you loved from 21 we won't see for another couple of years. They're sitting not far from where we are right now, just quietly maturing and biding their time.
Some underneath us.
Some underneath us as well.
Just don't tell all the secrets.
Yeah, just behind locked doors. But we do have a couple of wines from 21 that are about to be released that we can look at right now. And hopefully everyone out there has done just what we have here and got themselves organised with their glasses left to right. And with this first one already, Petit Blanc, but tell us a little bit about the 21 vintage and then how it manifests itself in this first wine we've got here.
Yeah, so I think in McLaren Vale and a lot of places around Australia, 2021 was almost textbook. We had beautiful winter and spring rainfall, and then we had another cool summer. We had good fruit set, so the yields were slightly above average, and the vines were nice and balanced. They were fresh because of the rain, but it didn't get into that spectrum where it was heavy rain, so there weren't really disease issues. And then we had a very dry and mild finish. February and March, where we started picking in March, things were cool. There was a few warm days so we could get the ripe flavours, which we need with McLaren Vale wines. They're big, more medium to full-bodied wines from McLaren Vale. And but everything was in balance. So you had nice flavours, nice tannins, and beautiful natural acidity, cold nights at vintage, and everybody was happy.
And happy winemakers, are a good thing for everybody, because I reckon you can actually feel a winemaker's mood in the wines they make. And if the winemakers are happy, the wines are good. I don't know if that's a chicken or an egg thing, but either way, it's always nice to hear from a happy winemaker, because some of them can be miserable buggers. Duncan Kennedy is not one of those. So tell us a little bit about this first wine, which is a wine of certainly not shy on personality, not shy on character. I really like this particular wine, and it might be something a little new to a lot of people out there. So tell us a little bit about Petit Blanc and why this wine has come to be.
Okay, well the Petit Blanc is it is a new release under that name, and the grape variety we've used is Muscat Blanc à Petit Grain. So it has a few other names.
I love your French accent, by the way.
Merci beaucoup. And so it has a few other names. People call it white Frontignac. Some people call it white Muscat. And we use this same wine to produce our fortified Muscat. That's where the vineyard hails from. But it also makes beautiful, fresh, vibrant, zippy white wines. And people often comment that aromatically it's a bit like a Gewürztraminer. It has those floral, lifted notes, bouncing out of the glass. But it has lovely acid line as well. We've done it in a dry style. And it's perfect for summer. And yeah, it's just something that complements the rest of our range. To go, you know, a white wine offering that we don't perhaps hit with our rosé, which we'll talk about next. But yeah, it's been well received so far.
All right. Well, I hope you swirl it as well as we do here, and that you've got actually enough of it to swirl. We know 60 mils can be at times a little bit tempting to swirl, but I think it should be enough. For me, this wine is something very special because in terms of where I see it, it's a little bit more Germanic in style. I can see sort of floral notes, beautiful intensity, a bit of sort of grapefruit on the back note. And yeah, for me, it's almost like I would describe it as a Gewürztraminer, but drier in style. And that's lovely. And I'm absolutely happy and stoked because I was always missing a white wine in our range. And now we've got one. And 2021 was a cooler year, as Duncan explained. I think, yeah, it lined all up. And I love also that it's got a little bit of, sort of viscosity, mouthfeel to it. As we know, it's spent a little bit of time in barrel. It just has got a little bit more sort of, richness to it. Lovely. And refreshing.
Like incredibly refreshing. And I share your joy at seeing a white wine in the K Brothers range. And who says things don't happen with any kind of speed here at K's? Here we are in the 3rd century of this place, and there's a white wine now available to those of you that love the label. But yeah, I think that the Gewürztraminer note that you make there, Michael, I think is really spot on, and it sort of takes me to Alsace, which is sometimes Germanic and sometimes French, whenever they can work that out. But yeah, it is that sort of exotic floral character without going over the top of being heavy or oily, and I love that sort of dry, sort of chalky finish on that wine. I can see a lot of bottles of that wine disappearing on that beautiful deck outside that we just saw earlier on the video. So for those of you who are having your first Muscat, Muscat Blanc Petit Grand, as Duncan would say, or what we're calling the Petit Blanc here, I hope you're enjoying it as much as we are. I reckon it's a cracker.
We particularly named it Petit Blanc and stroke off the muscat, just sort of, to take that muscat out of it. Because, of course, the market really knows muscat very well, and muscat, of course, then sometimes, that must be sweet, and then it gets put away. No, this is a dry style, a unique dry style, and that's why it's so appealing, I think. And I can see, well, in summer particularly, with oysters, for example, I see that as an absolute treat, which is great. All right.
Okay, so there has been a law passed recently that once you come into McLaren Vale, you have to talk about Grenache as often as you possibly can, and that's a damn good thing. And I'm very happy to abide by that law because I love Grenache, and we are living in a golden age of Australian Grenache. And I'm sure I don't need to tell any of you out there, because if you are aware of what happens at this place particularly and in this region, you'll be well up to speed on how great the Grenache is that is coming out of this part of the world and this particular winery at over the last few years. But there's a versatility to Grenache, and we can see it here in this rosé wine that Duncan will talk a little bit about. I think rosé, there's a really important thing to get right with rosé, if you ask me, and that's texture. And can you maybe touch on that and how you manage to get texture right in rosé?
Absolutely, Nick, and we do love to talk about Grenache. So I don't think it's just in the rosé. I think in the dry reds for Grenache too, texture is one of the real features. I think it really initially comes from the vineyard. It is the terroir. We've taken the rosé out of block 19, which is on the western side. It's quite calcareous, chalky. You might put the two together. But what we're doing is we're hand harvesting it, and we're we're using our basket press. So all of our wines, including the whites, from the Petit Blanc through to the Block 6, they're all basket pressed. And it's probably quite unusual to do whites or rosés in the basket press. And that way you get this softness and elegance to all the tannins. And that's just a lovely component of the texture. So we press the wine after it's just been hand harvested, and then we're fermenting the juice at cool temperatures. So we're retaining beautiful aromatics. And after fermentation, we leave it on the lees only for about 3 months. And we occasionally, when I say occasionally, once every 2 weeks, we'll stir the lees. And that's another layer of complexity, but that affects the mouthfeel as well. And that's another reason why you can get the texture and that chalkiness. And it's also like the natural acidity in Grenache is beautiful. And it's even more apparent with the rosé because you pick it a bit earlier than the dry red style. It's got lower alcohol. And again, it's got more acidity, but it still seems to be quite balanced.
Michael, rosé is, obviously a booming part of the market now. I think in France, and those sort of Provençal style rosés, those southern French style rosés that remind me a little of this one. They're not as good, obviously, as this wine, but this is that style, this sort of pale, dry rosé style that came from the south of France. I mean, they're drinking more pink wine in France now than they drink white. So how was it that rosé found its way into a traditional full-bodied red portfolio? Was it hard to get rosé into the K Brothers mix?
It was a hard-fought battle, I have to say, because of course at K Brothers we make those beautiful reds, dark, rich, and tannins and full-bodied. So when I joined K Brothers, not to the first year, not the second year, because at K Brothers we take a little bit of time. I basically spoke to the family, and then of course Colin K was still at the helm, and he said, "Look, Michael, yes, rosé, does that fit really with our core line, core range?" And he said, it's a bit heading into a girly direction, and we really don't think we need it. And then I said, "Well, Colin, what do you drink when it's 35 or 38 degrees out there in summer? And is it still a hillside or Block 6 Shiraz?" And he would say, "Yep, I cool it down a little bit and still drink that." But look, Germans are known for their persistence. That's for sure. And I asked this question several years until Colin possibly got sick of the question. And he said, "Look, why don't you make your rosé?" Of course, I don't make the wine. I'm not the winemaker. But we spoke to Duncan, and Duncan said, "Look, let's do that." They said, "Okay." 2015 it was, and we made our first rosé. The good story is that within 6 weeks, we sold out of it. Since then, rosé has been in our portfolio ever since.
Yeah.
And that's a little bit of the story behind how it got into the portfolio. Obviously, it's all about the making, how Duncan picks it at the perfect ripeness. He picks it, of course, much earlier. It's picked to make a rosé out of it, and it falls into place. And we are really happy to have that, and that's what I drink when it's 38 degrees.
Me too, and I'm drinking plenty of rosé, and I reckon pretty much every woman I know has a better palate than I am, so if going in a girly direction is the way to go, then I'm all for it. Put me in a frock and call me Katie. But it is really important, I think, Duncan, that these wines are thought of as, from the ground up, as rosé. They're not a winemaking afterthought. It's not a Saignée bleed to concentrate a red wine. To make a really great rosé, you have to go to the vineyard and start thinking about it, from inception through to completion. The wine has to always be rosé from go to woe. Is it true that, you did mention that you're basket pressing rosé. There wouldn't be too many people basket pressing rosé, but that texture that you're getting through things like basket pressing and lees stirring, that probably you know, you see a lot of rosé where there's just an addition of, well, there's just residual sugar there propping the wine up, but you've actually been able to build texture into that wine and step away from residual sugar.
Yeah. Look, I think people are a bit fascinated as to why we're using the basket press in these first two wines. The short answer is that's what we've got. So that's the honest answer. But it just, all of our wines, they are quite structurally driven, and the flavours and the mouthfeel and everything from the fruit is quite intense. And that's something that the basket press does, whether it's in the rosé, in the Grenache, or it's in the Block 6. It takes the edge off it, it softens it, it allows the tannins and the structure to be powerful, but with a bit of finesse. And yeah.
And there is a reason, and what I love about this place is, you know, that sense of tradition, and there is a reason why these traditional methods are still employed today, because, you know, they work. I mean, there is no need to go and buy some fancy new, you know, shiny stainless steel press if you've got these beautiful basket presses that work. So maybe we will we'll just have a look. No, we won't necessarily get to that just yet, but we want to just talk about the traditional winemaking processes here at K Brothers, Duncan. I mean, what is it like pretty much making the wines here the way they probably were made, you know, 100 years ago in so many ways?
Yeah, well, it's an honour, really. I mean, I'm one of the winemakers in a long lineage at K Brothers, and we do evolve, we do tweak things. But really the secret, and I harp on about a little bit, but it really is the terroir, it is the vineyard. It is Amery, this is where we are. It's the name of the vineyard. And you're starting there with this beautiful fruit. And if you can treat it delicately and not over-extract it, we're using a lot of hand harvesting. We're very, very gentle when we're crushing the fruit. We actually bought a new destemmer this year so we could be more gentle. A sorting table, so we are evolving that side of things so we can improve the quality. But then that fruit goes into the open fermenters, which they were built in the 1890s. So open fermenters, we're plunging them, hand plunging them. This is the red wines. Again, very gentle. And then at the end of fermentation, they're into the basket press. We shovel them out with a food grade shovel, and into the press they go, gentle, slow extraction, and then into the barrels. And we've got the three levels. The bottom cellar, which is underneath us now, that's where the premium wines go. The Griffin's Quay, the Hillside, and the Block 6, they're all underneath us. And that cellar is built with beautiful, thick stone walls, and the rocks, most of the rocks came from the property, and they even had a lime kiln back then, so they were making their own mortar. So beautifully insulated, so it just doesn't, you know, it's a very cool cellar, and that's another component to the house style. So the reds are aging very gently and slowly in the winery, and then when they're ready, we bottle them, and then it's time for you to cellar them if you need to, and drink them with family and friends, and be part of that, you know, that historical journey. So yeah.
And it is interesting when you talk about, well, you talk about food grade shovels. That's what my cutlery drawer is full of at home. But you talk about terroir, and the narrow definition of terroir is sort of soil and sunlight and weather conditions and things. But I think if you can extend the concept of terroir, this French idea that the wines taste the way they do because they come from a certain place, you can extend it into bricks and mortar, into winemaking techniques. And you know, the terroir of K Brothers is, you know, is within these walls as well. I mean, the wines are the way they are because they've been made in this sort of physical space using what you have at your disposal here. And I think that is, you know, really one of the key things that what makes it really, really special. We now can have a look a little at some of those elements, look at particularly about basket pressing and how basket pressing, you know, plays an important part in what you do with these red wines. No? Next one. Let's move on to the next one. Apparently we will see that at some point. Right. Nero is the next wine number 3. So we think of K Brothers and we think of Amory, the vineyard, and we obviously think of Shiraz and we think of Grenache. We don't necessarily think of Nero d'Avola, the great southern Italian variety, but here it is in front of us now. How did Nero find its way into Amory?
Well, it's a very interesting story, the Nero story. So it's the story started. It was around about 2007 or 2008. Colin Kay was on a trip in the US. Normally, of course, your trip and what you do in the US, you work basically 18 hours a day. But apparently they had one night off. The Americans gave them one night off. And they were in Atlanta. And so the winemakers from several districts and Coonawarra, McLaren Vale, Barossa went out. And, as one does, as a winemaker, you, of course, order some interesting wines. Colin Kay ordered something slightly fancy and out of the norm. Many others were possibly on Burgundy and Bordeaux and also beautiful Napa Cap. But, we are sort of Scottish or ancestors Scottish. So we've got a little bit of sort of not the deepest pockets. we are careful how we spend. And so Colin was basically looking at the list and he picked a Nero d'Avola. And the Nero d'Avola was served. And apparently during that night, it was one of the top 3 wines. So winemakers discussed the wines, and there were some, great growth, Burgundy and whatnot, but the Nero really stood out, and so he investigated, and that's how he found it. And I think, from memory, in 2008, I think the Yalumba nursery got their first Nero in. And he basically purchased them and we put them in the ground in 2010. And that's sort of how the story with the Nero starts.
So Colin Kay being Colin Kay, I mean, that's the great thing. He was in the US and immediately just starts thinking about putting vines into the ground here at Amory. So how many sort of vines are we talking about? How significant was the planting of Nero d'Avola here?
I think it was about just 1,400. It's planted just beneath Block 6, in a cooler spot, if you like. And I think we have only made the first 3 years. Of course, you don't get any crops. I think the story really begins of the Nero the first time in 2014. That was our first vintage we made. But yeah, I can see it's really suitable for McLaren Vale. We've got that slightly warmer climate. It's got high natural acidity, and it really does well. Stylistically, I see it not yet where it possibly will be in some years. For me, this is more like a brighter style. I love the sort of a little bit of herbalness, the sage character in it. Of course, the freshness, the brightness, the acidity line, which is in there. And yeah, it's a beautiful wine.
Yeah, no, the acidity is something that I...
Yep. So yeah, it's a wine which we are of course not making in big volumes and quantities. We only have, of course, 1,400 wines, and so it's a very small parcel. And we wish we would have a little bit more land, maybe to put more Nero in. We're discussing that, of course, in going forward. But yeah, I think it's a really well-befitting variety. And when we look at the climatic conditions in McLaren Vale, and also, of course, the changes of climates, Nero could be a really good variety to get us over the hurdle of slightly warmer temperatures.
Yeah, look, couldn't agree more. And then I think there's an enormous potential for some of these these Mediterranean, Southern European varieties, in a place like McLaren Vale. These are varieties, this traditionally comes from Sicily, it's the black grape of Avila in Sicily. Think about these places, they are sort of sun-drenched, they are by the ocean, they are very much like the situation we find ourselves in here, in McLaren Vale. It's also the greatest pizza wine on earth, I reckon, Nero de Avila. So if you happen to be Wednesday night, pizza night, wherever you might be, ladies and gentlemen out there, if there's about to be a knock on the door or a ringing of your bell and it's the pizza delivery guy, you've timed it perfectly, because I just think Nero and pizza works beautifully. Duncan, what do you like about the variety, and what do you like about making it, and what do you like about drinking it?
It is exciting because it's a more lighter to more medium-bodied style than our other wines, and we've been picking it so that it's normally only about 12.5% alcohol. So that means it's a bit fresher, a bit more lively. It's got amazing aromatics. It's not about the oak. We're trying to make something which is all about the vineyard. You've got those sort of purple fruits, violets, florals jumping out at you, and yeah, you can chill it down in summer if you want to, but it goes with a really, not just pizza, or I guess different types of pizza at least. So yeah, you can match it really well with food, and yeah, it is exciting. We don't have so much of it, but yeah, it's a beautiful wine.
It is. I love it. I want to see more Nero de Avila planted around this country, and I want them to all look as good as that one does, because I think that's an absolute cracker. I did say earlier that it is law in McLaren Vale to talk about Grenache. We touched on it in Rosé, but now we're getting into serious dry red Grenache. And then the thing is, there's obviously a long history with the variety at this place, but the Grenache for a long time here would have been as an engine for fortified wines. Well, the reason we have such great old vine Grenache resources in places like McLaren Vale and the other region to the north of Adelaide that apparently I'll be struck down by lightning if I mention it here. There's Barossa, something like that. We have these fantastic Grenache vineyards around the place, none better than really close to where I am right now. It was planted for tawny port production, but we've really finally given the variety the respect it deserves as a dry red variety in the last 10, 15 years, and right now making some of the greatest Grenache anywhere on the planet. I think we are sitting in what I would call Australia's Grenache Grand Cru. Is probably a circle I could draw sort of 5 kilometres around from roughly where we are right now. This is some of the finest Grenache anywhere on earth. This wine, I think, is just gorgeous. A previous vintage of this wine put a crown on your head, Duncan, and was justly celebrated with the Bushing King trophy. But tell us why you love the variety, why it works so well here, and why that we've moved on from the 321 wines to the 19 wines, starting with Griffin's Key. Tell us a little bit about the 19 vintage, how it is reflected in this 19 Griffin's Key Grenache, and why we should all just be drinking more and more Grenache.
Yeah. Grenache is just a superstar in McLaren Vale. If I talk about the 19 vintage compared to the 21 vintage, they were quite different. The yields, it was a very, very dry year, dry winter, dry summer. 2019 it was very warm in December of 18 prior to the vintage in 19, and the vines were working really hard. Fruit set was poor, so the crops were really low. But with that becomes intensity, and actually February and March were quite cool and still dry. So you've still got some cooler vintage characters across the 19s. They're not big and ripe, big superstar wines. They're more elegant, and there's a lot of floral notes and things like that. So the quality, I really like the 19 vintage, and I find that it has a bit more of a herbaceous edge than perhaps the year before, which was 18. But it's different. It's different to 21. You've got intensity, but you've got some lovely florals and things like that. And the Griffin's Key. So Grenache in McLaren Vale at Amery, it works beautifully. We've got the ocean, the Gulf of St. Vincent, which is only a few kilometres away. It has a really moderating effect, which Grenache enjoys. It has a long ripening cycle. Doesn't need a lot of water. So when we have those dry summers, the Grenache still grows beautifully and loves it. The cool nights leading into vintage just attenuates the lovely natural acidity that Grenache has. And you can get beautifully flavoured wines with the aromatics, a bit like the Nero. So, you know, it's not just about the palate, the aromatics and the floral notes, the rose petals, the potpourri that you get in Grenache, and then you often, with the Griffin's Key, you'll get those dark cherry notes that come through as the wine opens up. And yeah, it is just something that does so well here on a global scale, not just McLaren Vale being amazing Grenache from Australia, it's amazing Grenache from the world.
May I just add something to that? It's basically fantastic also. You know, we make, of course, and McLaren Vale is known for Shiraz and Cabernet, and then Grenache comes in. But I mean, at a very small percentage, because I think there's only 6% of grapes available, or vineyards available for Grenache in McLaren Vale. But that's a wine you really drink early. I mean, you know, for me, Shiraz or Cabernet, in particular from K Brothers, you put away, you drink in 6 or 8 years' time, whilst the Grenache is really singing early. And it's really, that's where I think the market also is to a degree. It's bright, it's sort of very fine tannins, and that's where people really sort of, it leaps out of the glass, the aromatics, and that's the beauty about Grenache. So we don't have to put that one too long away.
No.
You drink it now and you have fun drinking it now, and then you put maybe the Shiraz or the Cabernets away for a longer time to basically mature.
For a sales guy like you, Mike, it's the easiest job in Australian wine is trying to sell McLaren Vale Grenache, I would have thought. It's just go, I've got some, let me just take some orders. But you know, what I love about it is it's wine people get really obsessed and fixated on Pinot Noir, and for those guys of you in McLaren Vale, that's another grape variety you might not have heard of. But what I love about Grenache is all the things that get people excited about Pinot Noir, this, you know, perfume and lifted aromatics and suppleness of texture and fine tannins. Grenache does that too, but it does it in climates where Pinot Noir would just curl up and die. And I think this idea that Grenache is sort of warmer climate Pinot Noir, I think is it's not exactly accurate, but it's an easier way to get a little handle on it. And the perfume of these wines are just gorgeous. Those sort of wild raspberries and hints of spice, but that suppleness of texture. And I think getting tannin right in Grenache isn't easy, but but it's absolutely crucial to make serious Grenache, and that fineness of tannin that fans out through the wine, and that's what I see in that Griffin's Key. I think that's really, really classy Grenache on a world stage. I mean, you won a Bushing King trophy, which is the trophy for the best wine in the McLaren Vale Wine Show. I'm sure I don't need to tell you guys out there because you probably bought it all once they did win that trophy. But how does something like an accolade like that push you to make even greater Grenache?
Wow, I guess it's it's a great privilege to win these awards, but yeah, it's just reinforces the faith that we have in Grenache, and the winemakers of McLaren Vale, the viticulturists, they know about Grenache and they love Grenache, and they put a lot of effort into it, and so we wish we had more.
Yeah, doesn't everybody? Let's move on though to Shiraz now, because we do want to save a little bit of time at the end and for questions, and we really do need to give the two wines that round out this tasting due consideration, because a really, really spectacular pair of McLaren Vale Shiraz. So obviously most people, if you were to grab them in the street and say to me in one word, what's the first word that comes to mind when I say McLaren Vale? 9 out of 10 people probably would say Shiraz. So what is it about this particular part of the Vale that we're in, Duncan, that how does, what is distinctive about Shiraz grown here at Amory?
That's a beautiful question.
It'll take 2 hours.
Yeah, so don't go anywhere, everybody. We're going to be here for a while to settle in.
Well, there's a few things. You've of course got the regional component to McLaren Vale. I talked about the ocean and the influences of the sea breezes, but we also get the gully winds at night, and they funnel down. We've got the Onkaparinga Gorge just to the north, so there's always breezes which keep things disease-free and the vines happy. And then at night time, in the summer when it's warm, the sea breezes or the gully winds, they keep everything cool and moderate. And the Shiraz does like that. And from a terroir point of view, with the soil and the geology, we're able to get some really, again, textured characters. The Shiraz compared to the Grenache is a little bit coarser tannin, but they're still lovely and they're gritty rather than grippy, so they don't dry your mouth out too much. They just give a bit of interest, a nice textural element.
Yeah, a little gravel rolling across the palate.
Yeah, and some of that, again, I go back to the lots of limestone in the soil and ironstone and these old ancient rocks, and they all restrict the vigour and play their part. And then we do get the warm, dry summers, so you get those rich, very dark fruited characters in the Shiraz, and often what we see from around this area is a bit of earthiness, and that black olive character too, like tapenade, sort of black salty, especially on the palate, and that's a very Moorish character. And basically, especially in the hillside, that's the one for me which is the most Moorish, and when, I want more. So you have a glass and you want more, and then maybe the bottle's getting a bit lower than you thought.
Well, that's it. I always define a great wine is the one that you go to pour a second glass and you realise the bottle's empty. And Hillside is that kind of wine for me. Michael, you know a little bit, you know a lot about the history of this place, and you understand where Hillside sits in comparison to say something like Block 6. So can you just tell us, what makes Hillside distinctive?
I think, obviously we've got the site, which is the Amory site. That hillside vineyard was planted exactly 100 years after Block 6 was planted, which is, a centenary, if my math's correct, I'm sure. And I think...
So just tell us, just quickly, can we just talk a little bit about that process? So when you go to, you're taking cuttings from Block 6 to plant somewhere else. Tell us just quickly about how that process works.
Oh, well, basically, it is quite simple, and I suppose I'd possibly hand that question over to my viticulturist because he's running with that. But I think, Duncan, you should answer that because it's in your domain.
Okay, well, I guess there's all of the Shiraz we have at Amory is cuttings from Block 6, so they're like the mother vines. And I know we're talking about the hillside, but hillside, Colin calls it the baby Block 6, the hillside,
yeah.
and we roll with that, we use that. And the cuttings for Block 6, which we'll get to, they came from Thomas Hardy, just at the old Upper Tintara, or the Upper Tintara vineyard, and they came from Ranella, from the John Rennell history before them, and so there's a history of taking the cuttings from the vine when they're dormant, planting them in a vineyard, and then they sort of spread around. So Yeah, it's a pretty simple process, but when you've got a beautiful old vine that survives and works well, then you can extend the ancestry down
Yeah.
the family tree.
It's almost like these are the great-great-grandchildren
That's right.
of Block 6.
Yeah.
So, yeah, which is endlessly fascinating to go, there's the same sort of DNA running through those plants in there, but, you know, that's hillside because it comes from, you know, those spots. That's Block 6 because it is, you know, so distinctly Block 6.
I think when we look at hillside, for me, the wine is just a really beautiful full throttle style of McLaren Vale. When we taste the wine, of course, it speaks of that vineyard. What we get at Amory is particularly sort of more structured wines, more tannins. So that's what we have in the terroir, and that hillside basically really reflects it beautifully. It is a wine you can enjoy now, young as it is. I would decant it perhaps an hour or two, or you can leave it for 10 or 12 years in your cellar. And yeah, it's quite interesting. It's a big full-bodied style, but it still has got finesse. It's got to a degree restraint. Yeah.
And balance.
Yeah.
And it's this great misunderstanding of fuller-bodied red wines, and you see a whole lot of wines where people have tried to, you know, emulate a wine like that, but they don't have the balance, they don't have the composure of a wine like hillside. And that is, yeah, it's rich and it's dense and it's full-bodied and full throttle, like you say, and all power to its arm, because I love that. But everything is in balance and everything is, you know, really nicely composed. And you don't see oak poking out, you don't see alcohol heat, you don't see any of these sorts of problems when people try to make full-bodied red wines and don't maybe have the vineyard resource or don't have the winemaking skill, and they just try and make caricature wines. But this is actually beautifully balanced, incredibly well composed, and what great full-bodied McLaren Vale Shiraz should be.
I just want to read something off our sheet here, and you know, all our wines have pedigree, and of course we get fantastic third-party endorsement that helps it in selling as well. But for example, Joe Jawinski from Wine Advocate Robert Parker recently looked. It's not the 2019, it's 2018, but I think he described it quite beautifully. And he said, I think if I had one Shiraz to epitomize McLaren Vale, hillside Shiraz would be a strong contender. Coming from one of the region's more traditional producers, it's classic. It's a classic offering, concentrated, a variety of mixed berries, little bit of herbal intricacies, savory undercurrents, black olives, as Duncan explained, and cedary oak. It's medium to full-bodied, so it's not brooding. So definitely different to our northern neighbors. Yeah, it's ripe, velvety on the palate, and long and mouth-watering on the finish. I don't think I could have said it better.
No, and as a fellow wine writer, we always love when people read other people's notes with you just sitting there going, yeah, no, that's good. But Joe Savinsky knows what he's talking about, and I know that he loves these wines. Hello to Joe.
Yeah.
One day, this might get to you, Joe. We miss you, Joe. You're a fine man.
And, I just might slip in that we have already had a review of 2019 from our dear friend Gary Walsh, Winefront.
Your dear friend.
Yep.
Maybe.
And yeah, I just quote, rugged beauty and soul of a place, unique truly, 95 points. Here it is, I'm the sales guy.
There it is. And knowing Gary, he doesn't throw out scores like that willingly or easily. So, I mean, that is, you know, and he's right. There is a rugged beauty to that wine, and it is so, you know, absolutely of this place. And that to me is always the hallmark of the truly great wines, is they can only be what they are because they come from the places that they do, which is probably the perfect segue now into Block 6. This is, for me, one of the great Shiraz wines, not just of this region, not just of this country, but I think of anywhere in the world. It is a wine of real bearing, pedigree, and class. So we know, most people out there would know the Block 6 story quite well, but Duncan, perhaps it's really important for you to touch on what a privilege it is to work with a patch of vines just like these, and what you think they delivered you in 2019.
It is a great privilege, and myself and the team and the guys, we're custodians. The Kay family before us, Colin and Cuthbert and Bert and Fred. There's something really special about Block 6, and every year when we're harvesting it or when we're pruning it, like a lot of blood, sweat and tears goes into it. Especially when we're pruning it, the vines they're gnarly and they're low. Every vine's different, so there's a lot of thought goes into how you're pruning it and you're setting it up for the next vintage. And it's been through decades and decades, hailstorms and wind. And Alice Kay did tell me there was potentially snow one year. I don't know if that was an exaggeration. That didn't come from Colin.
I wish it was.
that was Alice, but surely there's been sleet and floods and heat waves. It's a special, unique wine. It's a single vineyard wine, and there's a few different soil types in there. And that's a great thing in a single vineyard wine because it gives us some complexity. And some parts are ripening a little bit earlier, so we get a few different flavours. We've got some richer areas, some softer, prettier parts, and some gnarly, intense, crazy sections. And that, you put them all together and you get a very complete wine. And because the vines are so old, we had a question about how old they were. They were planted in 1892, so the 2019, the vines were 127 years old. So this is a really special wine, there's lots of layers of different flavours and lots of complexity, and it is just truly amazing to work with it in the vineyard, mostly in the winery. We're cellaring it very gently, and then it is a wine that will age, and it will, for 5, 10, 15, 20 years in the right vintage. It will age. I think 2019, again, it's got lovely natural acidity, good intensity, good tannins. You can really drink that wine anywhere from 5, 10, 15 years. After that, wait and see. I'm very, very happy with the 19.
I mean, Michael, you get to, well, there was a time when you used to travel the world and take this wine around the world.
Well, it's 2 years ago.
But I mean, so if you can remember back that far, I mean, it must be a real joy to be able to go and take this wine to the old world of winemaking and be able to say, look, we're working with these beautiful old vineyards and look at what we can produce.
I have to put a little story in there. So you're right, Nick. I've travelled a fair bit and showcased Block 6 in various continents. And one particular story is always fantastic. So we do host a group travel with our US distributors, and they basically invite all their distributors in brands from all over the world, and you travel with them. So the guys from the Alsace, the guys from the Piedmont, from Tuscany, you name it. They are a little bit skeptical about Australia at times.
No, really?
Say, so they belittle you. They say, okay, so how old is your winery, Michael? Or Kay Brothers Winery. It's not my winery. I wish it was. But then they say, okay, well, we've got 19 generations of winemaking. And I say, oh, well, we've got 4, so it's not too bad. And then I say, so how old is your vineyard? And they say, oh, it's 70 or 80 years of age. And I said, that's interesting. Ours is, in this instance, 127 years of age. So many of those skeptical winemakers then just say, wow, you've got 127-year-old wines. How amazing. Of course, they're this year 130-year-old wines. But, guess what? It's the first wine they want to taste, and they want to have a big glass of it. Because, as we know, phylloxera hit in Europe. In most of the vineyards, 90% are phased out. They had to be replanted with American rootstock. So it's a really good story to tell. And whilst I was belittled at first, they're really then looking up to you.
Yeah, and then if you think about it, these vines on their own roots of that age, that would have come from some of those great old, we assume, Rhone Valley, Hermitage vineyards back in the day, that these things on their own roots, and I've had this conversation with some of the Rhone Valley winemakers, that they're fascinated by these old vine Shiraz wines from Australia because, in a way, they almost think that they are have this great link to the Hill of Hermitage and to that part of the Rhone Valley. That these wines on their own roots are direct antecedents of what when they talk about all those generations of winemakers before them, the wines that they made and the vines that they worked with were coming off own roots like these wines, not the American rootstock wines that have been replanted to replace everything wiped out by phylloxera.
The truth really is, and that's the point, Australia has the oldest Shiraz, Grenache and Cabernet wines in the world. And that's something to really embrace and talk about. I've just had
in the oldest dirt.
Yeah,
They're planted into the oldest dirt on the planet as well. These ancient soils. It is, it's a distinctive thing that you can. These wines are the oldest vines, still bearing vines in the world. Deep into some of the oldest soil on earth. It's going to make great, distinctive, really characterful wines like we see in Block 6. What do you think, Duncan? You happy with that?
Yeah, that's a good spiel, Nick. I concur.
Oh, not the spiel. You're happy with the wine. You're happy with the wine. We would like to touch on a couple of questions. I know we've been getting some questions from all of you out there, particularly you, Ellie. Whoever you are, Ellie, I love you, Ellie, because you are clearly engaged and listening to everything we've been saying. We've been firing through several questions, and I'd like to get through them as we can. So the first one that came through, and I think it goes back to the Nero de Avila, but talking about how long does it take from taking cuttings to getting a reasonable, viable yield that you can work with. We know that these cuttings can perhaps throw a bit of a crop in their first year, but how long does it take for you to get something that you're really happy to work with, Duncan?
It takes about 5 years before you get a smallish crop, and then from 5 to 10, that's when they start yielding reasonably well.
And I think we probably have answered the second question about what are the oldest vines on the property. And we're going back to
1892.
1892, 130 years this old. And then the third question is, if the hillside cutting from Block 6, it should be genetically identical, and they are. Is that right?
Well, there's also a bit of a confusing thing. You see,
here we go.
People
Get us
talk,
confused, Duncan.
People talk about clones, especially Pinot Noir, Chardonnay. They love to talk about clones. And sometimes people talk about...
So just quickly explain for people how there is clonal difference. So when we talk about one variety, like Pinot Noir or even Shiraz or any of these varieties, there are then clones underneath that.
Yeah, so a clone of Shiraz is like a mutated... so you start off with one Shiraz vine many thousands of years ago, and then they mutate a little bit, and when someone gets something that they like, they take that and then they take the cutting and then they clone it. But with Block 6, for example, that's actually a collection. So it was a vineyard with many different clones. We can't tell you exactly which clones they were. And so they took the cutting. So they're not all the same. And then as the vine grows, it changes a little bit. I use the word mutate, but that's what it does genetically. And then we're taking cuttings off of those ones, not all from the same vine, from across the vineyard. And so there is some diversity in there, some similarity. The core of it is very, very similar, but it's not the same clone.
No, it's a bit of Darwinism,
Confused?
bit of natural selection. But it's a really good point that so even when Block 6 was planted 130 years ago, back when the record keeping of where cuttings came from might have been a little bit patchy. I mean, we know that they would have been all Shiraz, but most likely different clones of Shiraz that would have come from Upper Tintara. But then, having said that, even if you were to get the same genetically identical material, plant it here and plant it here, you're still going to get different results.
Some variation. Yeah, subtle variation.
Subtle variation, and that's the endlessly fascinating thing that gets us all excited about wine is, and we could be here for hours. Like you people could go find something else out of the cellar and open it up, because we could be here for hours if we went down that rabbit hole, but we won't. But I know there is someone out there really excited to see that these wines are all vegan friendly, Michael. Must make it easier to sell because you're not discriminating against anybody and not cutting anyone out from enjoyment of the K Brothers wines. But maybe from a winemaking point of view, Duncan, what is it that makes them vegan friendly?
Well, it basically means that we don't use any animal products. So it's as simple as that.
Yeah, okay, but I mean that's like you're not dunking a live goat into a fermenter. When people talk about winemaking, talk about using animal products, we're talking about things like isinglass, fish bladders, or even egg whites in terms of fining the wines. I mean that's usually where it comes in, isn't it? That as a winemaker is trying to fine the wines and take some particulate matter out, and things like egg whites do a really good job to do that, but there are now vegan alternatives that do the same job.
Yeah, but so that's classically people might use milk, which is casein, or they might use the egg white to a red wine, say, to soften the wine, to soften the tannins a little bit. But because we put so much effort into our vineyard, if you can create a balanced product, a balanced grape from your vineyard, you shouldn't need the fining product. So
it's not like you're using a vegan-friendly fining product. No. You're just not fining at all.
That's correct.
Yeah. Because the work's been done in the vineyard.
Mm-hmm. A lot of work.
Yeah, a lot of work. Yeah, exactly.
Hard work.
And I'm really pleased to hear that answer. And it's not just as simple as we've just gone and bought the vegan-friendly alternative. We've actually done the work in the vineyard that we don't need to buy. Don't need to use any of it. I think that says a lot about the way that things are done here at K Brothers. Michael, do you have some last thoughts you want to add?
Well, there was something. There's very unique places people are streaming in from, which is fantastic. And just had word that a group of friends from a beach in Fraser Island, I'd never been to that, have opened our tasting pack and are tasting through.
Hello,
and
are
watching the tasting. So hello to Ian and friends. Thank you very much for joining us from a rather unique place. And I'm sure there will be many others which are in unique places as well. Whilst we've got unique places, we haven't talked about the uniqueness of the 2019 vintage and the rarity of 2019 vintage. And of course, now my full-blood marketing skills come through. We are down in yields about 60% in 2019. I think it was the lowest record yield. Well, not the lowest, the third lowest record yield, Duncan said. So he told me hold your horses, Michael. It's not the lowest. But yeah, so 2019 Block 6, we got very little of it. And I suspect it will be selling in an extremely short time.
Simply because I've asked to be paid in my body weight in Block 6. So that leaves about 7 bottles for the rest of you. So get onto it quickly. I go, oh, Michael.
Oh my God, I didn't know of that arrangement.
Yeah, no,
I had nothing to do with that.
any contract, read the fine print.
Anyhow, so I think there are some really good specials and interesting offers out there tonight, because it is really based on Block 6 is the big release tonight, the 2019 vintage. There is one, someone twisted my arm, and that's actually Alex Hardy. She's our D2C manager. She said, Michael, whilst it is 2019, we have to have something even more special for our hardcore fans. And truly, she twisted my arm. We went down the cellar and we found some beautiful older vintages. We've got a vertical 6-pack of Block 6. And yeah, I can't really say the price of it because I'm embarrassed. But it's online. I'm sure you've all seen the email going out. Then we've got what we call, well, the 6-pack of a taste of 2 vintages at a very special price. So all the wines you've tasted in the lineup as a little 6-pack, normally $312. That's $250. We've got a red 6-pack for people who love the red wines we make. And there we've got 1 Block 6, 2 Hillside, a Griffin's Key, and 2 Nero d'Avola at $280, $350. My goodness me, that's an amazing price. And then we have got, of course, what are we known for? Predominantly our Shiraz Signature Dozen. And the Shiraz Signature Dozen, is made up of 3 bottles of Block 6, 4 bottles of Hillside, and 5 bottles of basket press Shiraz at $580. So you're saving almost $140 of that.
Well, seriously, and I'll just say this as a completely unprompted thing. That is basically, in terms of true value, that is buying 3 bottles of, Block 6 and getting everything else for free.
I can't follow you in that, Matt, but
now pass the
it
check.
sounds good.
Pass the check. But seriously, that should be what 3 bottles of Block 6 cost you.
In the end of the day, Block 6 is something very unique, and even more unique in 2019. And yeah, get hold of it whilst you can. And my last words in that is also thank you very much for everyone tuning in from wherever you've tuned in. It's a fantastic opportunity. We were delighted to host this tasting. Nick, thank you very much for making all the way from...
I'm sorry I'm not Katie Spain.
No, you did a fantastic job. So next time, Katie will have to step in your shoes, not the other way around. Duncan, thank you very much for taking the time during vintage. And yes, you're a little bit weary because you've got 18-hour, 19-hour days every day since about 5 weeks or 6 weeks. Thank you very much for being so kind and being smiley and happy about it.
Being awake, basically. Thank you for being awake, Duncan.
No
worries.
I also want to reach out to the people who produced this for us. It's Benjamin Hunter, Intermedia, and Simon. Simon, what's your business name?
Just Simon.
All right.
Just Simon.
Who
Simon
basically
says.
put all the efforts in making this, well, as beautiful looking as it is. I mean, we were just basically decoration.
There's only so much to work with.
Well,
Michael.
guys, if you have no more questions, I think we have already taken 1 hour and 12 minutes. Thanks again for joining us, for supporting our winery. And yeah, we look forward to getting some orders. Yeah, so we would love to see you in future at our cellar door. All the best, and
Cheers.
cheers everyone.
To K Brothers and
Cheers.
to everyone who loves the wines. Cheers.
Thank you.